So the Steelers are still in that annoying spot where nothing is simple, man. We don't have a head coach, we don't have a set QB, and we got the last great name at the position going public with how this whole transition should go down. We're looking at a possible reunion with a quarterback who still divides the fan base to this day, an expensive receiver popping up as a market opportunity that really shows how poor our offense is right now, and a massive decision looming on the biggest contract on offense that could finally blow the doors off a rebuild a lot of people are still resisting. I'm here today with a lot for us to talk about, no filter, no nostalgia, and no empty promises. So stay with me because I'm going to get you up to speed, and let's get into the video. I'm going to start with a quote that you can't just treat like any other opinion, because when Ben Roethlisberger decides to talk publicly about the future of the Steelers quarterback, that carries a weight that nobody else in this franchise carries. He's the last real standard of stability Pittsburgh had at the position, and hearing what he thinks now says way more about where the team is at than about specific names, especially after another season without a playoff win, the 9th in a row, and Mike Tomlin leaving an emotionally broken locker room. Big Ben didn't talk about a savior or some magic fix. He talked about a process and a criteria, something the Steelers clearly lost since he retired. His idea is simple but uncomfortable for a lot of people. If there's a chance to bring in Aaron Rodgers for one more year, he'd do it in a heartbeat. Not to chase a ring, but to serve as a bridge, to give time and protection for Will Howard to develop. That completely changes how we look at this, because for the first time, someone with history in the building is calling for explicit patience. Howard was a 6th-round pick, didn't play in 2025, sat as the QB3, and dealt with an injury early in training camp, but that doesn't erase the heavy college resume he brings from Ohio State. We're talking national champ, leader in the Big Ten in completion percentage, yards, and touchdowns. Roethlisberger clearly sees something there that fans haven't caught on to yet, so much so that he went further and said if Rodgers isn't in the picture, he'd start 2026 with Will Howard as the guy. He'd surround him with a cheap veteran, a locker room leader to hold things down and help day-to-day, mentioning guys like Kirk Cousins, Marcus Mariota, and Carson Wentz. That makes it clear it's not about glamour, it's about a basic structure. This whole backdrop is even more delicate because whoever starts at QB in 2026 is going to depend directly on who the next head coach is, only the 4th in 57 years of history, and that's a huge deal in Pittsburgh. This franchise has always lived on continuity, and now it's being pushed into brand new territory. Betting too early could burn a prospect, but holding back too long could delay a necessary rebuild. That's exactly where Roethlisberger's words carry weight. He's not asking for a rush, he's asking for a plan, something the Steelers haven't had lately, while acting like the position would just fix itself, and this colder, less emotional view inevitably opens the door for other talks already starting behind the scenes. There's a name popping up again, and the gut reaction for a lot of folks is to immediately shut it down, Justin Fields, and that says a lot about how tired Steelers fans are of tries that never turned into solutions. But we got to have this talk with less selective memory and more awareness of where the franchise is right now, because the context today is totally different than it was before. What happened with Fields and the Jets was a complete disaster. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Big contract, hyped expectations, injuries, bad play, an environment that never helped, and a team that asked things of him he never was. Everything went wrong. And because of that, his market value has changed completely. He's not a prospect anymore. He's a guy trying to save his career, and that totally changes the risk, the cost, and the role he'd have in Pittsburgh. The Steelers know this player better than most teams, not because he became a star here, but because Pittsburgh was where he had the most functional stretch of his career, managing games, winning, and playing within a clear plan. That's not a small detail, that's identity. The Steelers have always been a place where the QB doesn't need to be a hero, he just needs to be functional. Bleacher Report isn't bringing up this reunion for nostalgia, they're bringing it up because this is where Fields could actually operate within clear limits, something that never happened in Chicago and definitely not in New York. Now look at the Steelers right now. Mike Tomlin is gone. The team is looking for just its 4th coach in 57 years. There's no franchise QB locked in, and any talk of absolute stability right now is a fantasy. In this spot, Fields shows up not as the final answer, but as a transition option. Known risk, limited ceiling, but clear utility, especially if Aaron Rodgers doesn't want to come back or isn't part of the new coach's plan. Fields is 26, knows the locker room, knows the city, knows the weight of the jersey, and knows exactly what went wrong with the Jets because he was exposed in every way possible. At the same time, you can't pretend the red flags aren't there. He still holds the ball too long, he's still slow through his progressions, and he still struggles reading the whole field. That doesn't just vanish overnight. So the real question isn't if Justin Fields is the future. That question doesn't even make sense right now. The question is if he can be part of a transition process without messing up what comes next. In that light, the idea of an open QB competition starts to make sense. Fields, Will Howard, Mason Rudolph, and maybe a draft pick. That creates real competition. No promises, no contract that ties the team down for years. The Steelers don't need a savior right now. They need someone who lets them evaluate the roster, the system, and the staff while the house gets cleaned up. That's something a lot of people refuse to accept because Pittsburgh has always meant continuity. But this moment doesn't allow for clinging to the past. It demands pragmatism. Bringing Fields back wouldn't be a move of desperation. It'd be a move of opportunity. Low cost, known risk, and a well-defined job, especially if the alternative is just standing still waiting for a perfect QB who doesn't exist on the market. The Steelers' mistake lately hasn't just been getting names wrong, it's been getting the plan wrong. Fields only makes sense if he's part of a very clear plan with real competition and no special treatment, which depends entirely on the next head coach. Whoever takes that job is inheriting not just a roster in transition, but the job of redefining the standard for the most important position on the team. That's exactly why this rumor can't be brushed off as offseason noise. It's a symptom of a Steelers team that, for the first time in a long time, has to admit they're at a point of a real restart, not just a symbolic one. So, would you bring Justin Fields back to the Steelers after what went down with the Jets, or do you think that chapter is closed? Let me know in the comments. And if you like this straight talk from fan to fan, hit the like and subscribe because the conversation is stepping up to a big name that could change the offense. And when a heavy name starts getting linked to the Steelers along with the Bills and Raiders, the first reaction is to think it's just an offseason list for clicks. But when you really look at it, Brandon Aiyuk fits the current Steelers situation way more than it seems at first because right now this offense is shallow, predictable, and way too dependent on one guy. DK Metcalf is the only receiver who actually makes a defense adjust their coverage, and even then, he had a season clearly below what you expect from a guy at that level. The numbers don't lie. Metcalf finished 2025 with 59 catches and still led the team in yards, which by itself shows the structural problem with this group. The rest of the wide receivers just didn't produce, and that leaves any QB, whether it's Fields, Howard, or whoever, playing in survival mode. When Aiyuk's name comes up, it's not about bringing in a savior, it's about raising the floor of the offense and creating a duo that forces the defense to respect both sides of the field, something the Steelers don't have today. Aiyuk is coming off a completely lost year. He didn't play in 2025 because of that serious knee injury, was put on the reserve list at the end of the season, and John Lynch basically admitted his time in San Fran is over. That drops his value, drops expectations, and turns a player who used to be untouchable into a market opportunity. But it also sets off clear alarms because the Aiyuk of 2026 isn't that rising star anymore. He's a player trying to prove he can still play at a high level after a major injury. You got to weigh that coldly. From the Steelers' side, the logic is simple. If the team is already going through a transition with the coach, the QB, and the offensive identity, having more than one reliable receiver helps any plan no matter who's throwing the ball. The offense can't keep living off broken plays or individual flashes. Pairing Metcalf with Aiyuk creates at least a functional base, even if neither option is perfect. At the same time, you can't ignore that the Steelers historically don't bet big on players coming off serious injuries without a clear guarantee, and they don't usually get into bidding wars for names that might be past their prime. That's the delicate balance here. Aiyuk only makes sense if he's cheap, on a short deal, and doesn't come in with superstar status. He has to be treated as a controlled bet, not a final solution. The Bills and Raiders are in this because they have similar issues. Buffalo needs to take the insane pressure off Josh Allen. Vegas needs to support a young QB they might draft. And the Steelers are right in the middle. Not a Super Bowl ready team, but they can't accept another year of being irrelevant on offense. So this link to Aiyuk says more about the state of the Steelers than the player himself. It shows a team trying to explore a market where guys who were expensive before are now opportunities. The risk is there for sure. Injury, drop in play, uncertain fit. But maybe the biggest risk right now is standing still while the rest of the AFC gets better. That's why this rumor isn't just a January dream. It's a direct reflection of a Steelers team trying to find ways to be competitive on offense without ignoring reality, keeping the pragmatism this jersey demands, but knowing that without more talent around them, no QB plan is going to hold up for long. To wrap up this news round, there's a discussion that's uncomfortable precisely because it makes sense. The possibility of the Steelers making a very tough call on DK Metcalf's contract. When this kind of talk starts circulating, it's not just off-season noise. It's a sign that the franchise is looking in the mirror without the makeup on. Touching the biggest offensive contract on the roster isn't a fine adjustment. It's a change of direction. Metcalf came in as the clear number one, got the star contract, and became the focal point of an offense that already had few options. But 2025 made it clear that the context around him just doesn't support that kind of investment. He led the team in yards, but with the worst numbers of his career, finishing with only 59 catches, while a running back led the team in receptions. That's not a stat detail. It's a symptom of a broken, predictable offense with no structure. The Steelers today have a very expensive, aging defense, an offense with no set QB, and very few young pieces ready to step up immediately. Keeping a wide receiver making over $30 million a year in this scenario isn't being competitive. It's a window misalignment. Metcalf hasn't become a bad player, but the physical prime that justified that contract can't be taken for granted anymore. When you look at age, cost, and the roster timeline, things just don't match up. The Steelers aren't one piece away from competing right now. They're several structural decisions away. Insisting on keeping Metcalf as the offensive anchor might just delay a process that should have already started. Of course, the contract math is heavy. There's dead cap. There's financial impact. There's the fear of messing up the timing and selling low. But holding on to an asset that's too expensive on a team that's going to get worse before it gets better is a classic mistake for teams trying to fake being competitive. If Pittsburgh can get any relevant draft capital for Metcalf, even below ideal value, it opens up real flexibility. It lets them move up in the draft, align the roster's age, and speed up the offensive rebuild. The idea of letting the defense age while rebuilding the offense sounds harsh, but it's exactly the kind of pragmatism teams like the Rams used to get back to the top. The Steelers have always been proud of stability, but stability can't turn into being stuck, especially now with a new staff and no clear QB. Keeping Metcalf might get you a few more wins in 2026, but it doesn't fix the core problem and might even hide it. Trading him now takes the pain early and lets you plan with more clarity. It's not a popular decision and never will be, but it's the kind of choice that defines if the Steelers are going to stay stuck in the middle of the pack or if they'll accept a tough stretch to get back to the standard this jersey has always demanded. Because in Pittsburgh, respecting history was never about keeping big names. It was always about making the hard choices at the right time. Well, my friends, all of this makes it clear the Steelers have reached a point in the offseason where you can't lie to yourself anymore. It's not a detail here or a tweak there. It's big decisions. It's moving on QBs. It's facing heavy contracts and accepting that maybe the path involves a step back before we can truly compete again. That's exactly how this franchise has always been measured. Now it's time for you guys to get in on the talk too. Say what you would do. Disagree. Speak up. Because this only works this way. And if you like this straight talk, no fantasy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned because the Steelers only become the Steelers again when the expectations match the size of their history, and the conversation continues in the next video.